The emergency beacon screamed across 17 star systems before anyone bothered to answer it. In the cold vacuum of space, distress calls were as common as asteroid dust, and most civilizations had learned to ignore the desperate pleas of lesser species. The Galactic Council had established protocols for such things. Resources were precious. Intervention was costly. Only calls from recognized member species warranted immediate attention. The signal came from the edge of the Kepler Nebula, where few dared to venture. The area was known for its unstable gravity wells and radiation storms that could fry a ship's electronics in minutes. Pirates avoided it. Merchants gave it wide berths. Even the military patrols stayed clear unless absolutely necessary. It was, by all accounts, a perfect place to die unnoticed. Commander Thex of the Zephyrian Trade Consortium was the first to detect the signal on his long-range sensors. His scaled hands moved across the control console with practiced efficiency as he analyzed the transmission. The language was unfamiliar, primitive by galactic standards, with crude emotional inflections that suggested a non-technological species. His translator struggled to make sense of the garbled words. Unknown vessel broadcasting on emergency, frequency 77 Alpha. Thex spoke into his communicator, his voice carrying the typical disinterest of someone who had heard too many death screams across the void. State your species designation and member status. The response that came back made him pause. It wasn't the usual plea for rescue or demand for assistance. Instead, a young voice, clearly distressed and fighting back what sounded like tears, spoke in broken galactic standard. Please, anyone, my mother is dying. She got hurt bad when her ship broke. I don't know how to fix her. Please, someone help us. Thex's ridge of spines along his neck flattened in annoyance. A juvenile of some unknown species, probably from a crashed exploration vessel. The voice was definitely young, maybe equivalent to a Zephyrian adolescent, though it was hard to tell with alien vocal patterns. The emotional distress was clear enough, but that only made it more problematic. Emotional species were unpredictable, often irrational, and generally more trouble than they were worth. Negative, unknown vessel, Thex replied coldly. This is a restricted shipping lane. Contact the nearest Galactic Council representative for assistance. I don't know how to do that. The voice came back now, clearly crying. My mother showed me how to use the emergency radio, but she can't talk anymore. She's bleeding really bad, and her breathing is all wrong. Please, I'm scared. Thex sighed and terminated the connection. His ship was carrying a valuable cargo of rare metals that needed to reach the Centauri station within the week. He couldn't afford delays, especially not for some primitive species that probably wasn't even sentient by Council standards. The universe was full of suffering. That was simply the natural order of things. 3 more ships received the signal over the next 6 hours. A Valdorian science vessel briefly considered investigating until their sensors detected the radiation levels in the area. A Corellian freighter captain laughed when his translator finally made sense of the transmission and shared it with his crew as entertainment. A military patrol from the hegemony logged the signal and marked it as non-priority civilian distress before continuing their routine sweep. The young voice continued broadcasting, growing weaker and more desperate with each attempt. Sometimes there were long silences, broken only by the sound of labored breathing and quiet sobbing. Occasionally, the voice would speak in what seemed to be its native language, presumably to the unconscious mother, offering comfort and promises that help was coming. By the 8th hour, most ships in the area had moved on. The signal was becoming a nuisance, an irritating reminder of the cruelty inherent in deep space. Some captains had blocked the frequency entirely rather than listen to the deteriorating emotional state of the unknown juvenile. It was during the 10th hour that the UES determination detected the signal. Captain Sarah Chun was in her quarters, reviewing supply manifests, when Lieutenant Torres knocked on her door. The young officer's face was pale, his usual composure shaken. "Captain, you need to hear this," Torres said without preamble. "We've picked up a distress signal. It's a kid, ma'am. A child calling for help." Chun followed Torres to the bridge, where the communications officer was monitoring the emergency frequency. The voice that came through the speakers hit her like a physical blow. It was definitely a child, probably no more than 10 or 12 years old based on the vocal patterns, speaking in broken but understandable galactic standard. "Hello, is anyone there? My mother is really cold now, and I can't wake her up. I tried giving her water like she taught me, but she won't swallow it. I think she might be dying. Please, if anyone can hear this, we're in the big cloud of purple gas near the yellow star. Our ship has a red stripe on the side. Please come find us." The bridge fell silent. Chen had served in deep space for 15 years. She had seen the aftermath of pirate attacks, witnessed the slow death of colonies cut off from supply lines, and had personally delivered more death notifications than she cared to remember. But there was something about the pure, innocent desperation in that young voice that cut through all her professional detachment. "How long has this been broadcasting?" she asked quietly. "According to the logs, about 10 hours, Captain," the communications officer replied. "The signal's getting weaker. Either their power is failing or—" He didn't finish the sentence. "Any other ships responded?" "Several have acknowledged the signal, but no one's moved to assist. The source appears to be in the Kepler Nebula's radiation field. It's considered a navigation hazard." Chun stared at the tactical display, showing their current position relative to the nebula. The Determination was a mid-range exploration vessel, well-equipped but not exactly built for rescue operations in hazardous space. They were currently 3 days out from Earth, carrying a delegation of scientists to a conference on Europa Station. Detouring into the nebula would add at least a week to their journey, possibly more if the radiation damaged their systems. "Captain," her first officer, Commander Rodriguez, approached her quietly. "The radiation levels in that area are significant. We'd be risking the ship and everyone aboard. And we don't even know what species we're dealing with. They could be hostile once we arrive." Chen listened to another transmission from the child, this one even weaker than before. The voice was hoarse now, exhausted from hours of pleading with an apparently uncaring universe. "Has anyone identified the species?" she asked. "Negative, Captain. The vocal patterns don't match anything in our xenobiology database. Could be a first contact situation." Rodriguez leaned closer. "Captain, I understand the emotional appeal here, but we have our own mission parameters. The science delegation is expected at Europa Station. We can't risk human lives for an unknown species, especially when there's no guarantee we can even help them." Chen knew Rodriguez was right from a purely logical standpoint. Starfleet protocols were clear about unnecessary risks in hostile environments. The Prime Directive cautioned against interference with unknown species. Every regulation and guideline suggested they should log the signal and continue on their way. But as she listened to the child's voice calling out desperately across the void, she thought about her own daughter back on Earth. She imagined Sarah alone on a damaged ship, watching her mother die while calling for help that never came. She pictured that same innocent voice growing weaker and weaker until it finally fell silent forever. The universe might be cold and uncaring, but humanity didn't have to be. "Navigation, plot a course for the nebula," Chun ordered, her voice firm with decision. "Best possible speed." "Captain," Rodriguez protested, "we should at least consult with Starfleet Command before." "There's no time for consultations, Commander. That child's mother is dying, and from the sound of it, they don't have long." Chun moved to her command chair, her expression resolute. "Sometimes you have to choose between following regulations and doing what's right. Today, we're going to do what's right. But the risks are acceptable," Chen cut him off. "This is what we signed up for when we put on these uniforms. To explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life, and to boldly go where no one has gone before. Well, there's new life out there that needs our help." The bridge crew exchanged uncertain glances, but they began implementing their orders. Chen opened a channel on the emergency frequency, hoping the child was still listening. "Unknown vessel. This is Captain Sarah Chun of the United Earth Ship Determination. We have received your distress call and are en route to your location. Please continue broadcasting so we can track your signal. Help is coming." The response came back immediately, the child's voice suddenly, bright with hope and relief. "You're really coming? You're going to help my mother?" "Oh, thank you, thank you. My name is Kira, and my mother is Captain Nehru of the exploration ship Wanderer. We were studying the pretty lights in the purple cloud when something went wrong with our engines. There was a big explosion, and Mother got hurt real bad. She's been sleeping for a long time now, and I can't wake her up." Chun felt her chest tighten. The child's trust was absolute, her gratitude heartbreaking. She had no idea what they would find when they reached the nebula, but she knew they had to try. "Hold on, Kira. We're coming as fast as we can. Can you tell me about your mother's injuries?" Is she breathing? Yes, but it sounds all bubbly and wrong. And there's blood coming from her head where she hit the console. I put some bandages on it like she taught me, but they keep getting red again. She taught me lots of first aid, but I don't know what to do when someone won't wake up. The ship's medical officer, Dr. Patel, had joined them on the bridge. She listened to Kira's description with growing concern. Sounds like a severe head trauma, possibly with internal bleeding, she whispered to Chun. If the child description is accurate, we may be looking at a very short window for intervention. Chun nodded grimly. Kira, my name is Sarah, and I need you to listen very carefully. We have a doctor with us who's going to help your mother, but we need you to do exactly what we tell you, okay? Okay, Sarah, I'll do anything to help my mother. Good girl. First, I need you to check if your mother is still breathing. Put your ear close to her mouth and listen. There was a moment of silence before Kira's voice returned, shaky with fear. She's breathing, but it's really quiet and slow. Is that bad? Dr. Patel grimaced. That's not a good sign, Captain. We need to get there soon. The determination pushed through space at maximum warp, the stars stretching into lines of light as they raced toward the nebula. The radiation levels increased steadily as they approached, forcing them to raise shields and reroute power from non-essential systems. ETA to the nebula edge. Chun asked. 18 minutes at current speed, Captain, the navigator reported. But we're going to have to reduce speed once we enter the radiation field. Sensors will be limited, and we'll need to rely primarily on the distress signal to locate them. Chun opened the channel again. Kira, we're getting close to where you are, but the purple clouds are making it hard for us to see. Do you have any lights on your ship that you can turn on and off? We need something bright to help us find you. I can try. Mother showed me how to work some of the controls. Let me see. I found the outside lights. I'm turning them on and off now. Can you see them? The tactical officer squinted at his screens, trying to make sense of the sensor readings through the interference. There, bearing 27 Mark IV. Intermittent light source consistent with emergency beacons. That's our girl. Take us in, nice and steady. As they navigated deeper into the nebula, the ship shuddered occasionally from gravitational anomalies. The radiation was playing havoc with their systems, causing static on all frequencies and making the child's voice fade in and out. Kira, how are you doing over there? Chun called out during a brief moment of clear reception. I am scared, Sarah. My mother made a really bad sound a few minutes ago, like she was choking, but then she got quiet again. Her face looks really pale now. Please hurry. We're almost there, sweetheart. Just a little bit longer. Dr. Patel was already preparing emergency medical equipment, laying out surgical instruments, and loading hypospray injectors with stimulants and pain medication. Captain, based on what the child is describing, we're looking at a critical head injury with possible intracranial pressure. I'll need to operate immediately once we get her to sickbay. Whatever you need, Doctor. The ship's sensors finally locked onto a solid metallic object floating dead in space about half a kilometer ahead. Through the swirling gases of the nebula, they could make out the dark silhouette of a small vessel, maybe a quarter the size of the Determination. Its hull was damaged along one side, with debris floating around it like a mechanical graveyard. There she is, Chun breathed. Hail them. Kira, we can see your ship. We're going to come alongside and bring you and your mother onto our ship where our doctor can help her. Really? You can save my mother. The hope in the child's voice was overwhelming. We're going to do everything we can. As the Determination maneuvered closer, Chun got her first good look at the damaged vessel. It was clearly of non-human design, with flowing organic curves and a hull that seemed to shimmer with an opalescent quality. The red stripe Kira had mentioned was actually a series of intricate patterns that ran along the ship's hull, like decorative artwork. Definitely not a known species, Rodriguez observed. The hull configuration is unlike anything in our database. Through the viewport of the damaged ship, they could see movement. A small figure appeared at what looked like an observation window, waving frantically. Even at a distance, it was clear this was a very young member of whatever species they were dealing with. Transporter room. Prepare for emergency beam out. 2 life signs, 1 critical condition. Captain, the transporter chief's voice crackled through the comm. The radiation is interfering with our targeting scanners. I'm not sure I can get a clean lock through all this interference. Chun cursed under her breath. They had come so far, only to be stopped by the very radiation that had made this rescue so dangerous in the first place. Can we dock with their ship? The engineer shook his head. Their docking port appears to be damaged, and their hull configuration isn't compatible with our airlocks anyway. Chun stared at the small figure in the window, knowing that time was running out for the injured mother. There had to be a way to get them off that ship. Shuttlecraft, she said suddenly. We can take a shuttle over and manually extract them. Captain, launching a shuttle in this radiation field is extremely hazardous, Rodriguez warned. The interference could cause complete system failure. Then, we'll fly it manually. Chun was already heading for the turbolift. Dr. Patel, grab your emergency medical kit and meet me in Shuttle Bay 2. Rodriguez, you have a bridge. If we're not back in 2 hours, get the ship out of here and report our findings to Starfleet Command. Captain, you can't. That's an order, Commander. As the turbolift doors closed, Chun could hear Rodriguez cursing in Spanish. She understood his frustration, but she also understood something he apparently didn't. Sometimes being human meant doing things that were illogical, dangerous, and completely against your own best interests. Sometimes being human meant risking everything to save someone you'd never met simply because it was the right thing to do. The shuttlecraft Galileo launched into the swirling chaos of the nebula 10 minutes later, with Chun at the controls and Dr. Patel monitoring her medical scanner from the co-pilot's seat. The small craft bucked and rolled through the gravitational distortions, its hull groaning under the stress of the unstable space. There, Dr. Patel pointed through the view screen. The breach in their hull. Looks like we can dock directly with that opening if we're careful. Chun maneuvered the shuttle with delicate precision, using manual controls as the automated systems flickered and failed around them. The radiation was frying their electronics one circuit at a time, but they were close enough now to complete the rescue manually if necessary. The shuttle's docking clamps engaged with a metallic thunk that echoed through the small craft. Chun and Dr. Patel donned their environmental suits and cycled through the airlock into the unknown vessel. The interior of the ship was beautiful in an alien way, with walls that seemed to flow like liquid metal and bioluminescent panels providing soft, warm light. But the beauty was marred by the obvious signs of disaster. Debris floated freely in the zero-gravity environment, and there was clear evidence of an explosion near what appeared to be the engine compartment. They found them in what seemed to be the bridge area. The mother was floating unconscious near a damaged control console, held in place by restraint straps that the child had apparently rigged to keep her from drifting away. The child herself was small and delicate, with large luminous eyes and skin that had a faint bluish tint. She looked remarkably humanoid, though clearly not human. "Are you Sarah?" the child asked in her small voice, speaking perfect English now that they were close enough for the universal translators to work properly. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm Sarah. This is Dr. Patel. We're here to help your mother." Dr. Patel was already scanning the unconscious woman with her medical tricorder. The readings were grim. Severe concussion, internal bleeding, and signs of brain swelling that could prove fatal within hours. "We need to get her to sickbay immediately," the doctor said urgently. "Her condition is deteriorating rapidly." They carefully transferred both the mother and child to the shuttle, Dr. Patel working to stabilize the woman's condition while Chun flew them back to the Determination through the chaotic nebula. The return trip seemed to take forever, with the shuttle's systems failing one by one under the assault of the radiation. As soon as they docked, medical teams rushed the unconscious woman to sickbay while Chun took Kira to the bridge. The child was exhausted and scared, but she had shown remarkable courage throughout the ordeal. "Is my mother going to be okay?" Kira asked, looking up at Chun with those huge, trusting eyes. "Dr. Patel is the best doctor in Starfleet," Chun replied honestly. "If anyone can save your mother, she can." As they waited for news from sickbay, Chun realized that this rescue had become something much more significant than a simple emergency response. They had just made first contact with an entirely new species, one that demonstrated remarkable intelligence, courage, and emotional depth. And they had done it not through careful diplomatic protocols or scientific surveys, but through a simple act of compassion. The child who had sobbed for help across the void had just changed the course of human history, though she would probably never understand how profound that change would be. The real test, however, was yet to come. How would the galaxy react when they learned that humanity had risked everything to save the life of a single unknown alien, simply because a child had asked for help? The answer to that question would reshape everything they thought they knew about their place in the universe. R. Patel's hands moved with surgical precision as she worked on the unconscious alien woman in sickbay. The operation had been going on for 3 hours now, with the medical team fighting to save a life using equipment never designed for non-human physiology. Every few minutes, one of the nurses would call out readings from the biomonitors, tracking vital signs that they were learning to interpret in real time. Neural pressure is stabilizing, announced Nurse Kelly, her voice tight with concentration. The cranial bleeding appears to be slowing. Good, Dr. Patel replied without looking up from her work. Increase the oxygen flow by 2% and monitor for any changes in brain activity. In the corner of sickbay, Kira sat quietly in a chair that was far too big for her small frame. She had refused to leave her mother's side, and Chun had decided not to force the issue. The child's large eyes never left her mother's still form on the bio bed, occasionally asking questions in her soft voice. Why is her skin changing colors? Kira asked, noticing the way the monitors cast different hues across her mother's naturally blue-tinted skin. Those are just lights from our medical equipment, Dr. Patel explained gently. They help us see what's happening inside your mother's body, so we can fix what's broken. Like when Mother uses the scanner to see inside our ship's engine. Exactly like that, sweetheart. On the bridge, Commander Rodriguez was dealing with a crisis of an entirely different nature. The communications array was lighting up with incoming transmissions from across the sector. Word of the rescue was spreading faster than subspace signals should have been able to carry it, and the responses were not encouraging. Captain, Lieutenant Torres approached Chun with a concerned expression. We're receiving multiple priority communications from various Galactic Council members. They're demanding an explanation for our actions in the nebula. Chun frowned. How do they find out about the rescue so quickly? Best guess. The same emergency frequency that transmitted the original distress call also picked up our rescue coordination transmissions. Every ship within 7 light-years would have heard the whole thing. Rodriguez pulled up the tactical display, showing their current position relative to other vessels in the area. Several ships that had previously ignored the child's pleas were now converging on their location, their intentions unclear, but likely not friendly. Captain, we have a problem, the communications officer announced. I'm receiving a direct transmission from Admiral Vex of the Zephyrian Trade Consortium. He's ordering us to halt all aid to the unknown vessel and submit to inspection for violations of first contact protocols. Admiral Vex? Chen's expression darkened. Isn't he the one whose ship initially received the distress call and chose to ignore it? That's correct, ma'am. According to the transmission logs, Commander Thex of the Zephyrian vessel Prophet's Edge was the first to respond to the emergency signal and then terminated communication. Chun felt her anger rising. The same species that had coldly ignored a dying child's pleas was now demanding authority over the situation. It was exactly the kind of bureaucratic callousness that made her grateful to be human. Any response to Admiral Vex? Rodriguez asked. Tell Admiral Vex that we are conducting a humanitarian rescue operation under emergency protocols, Chen replied firmly. United Earthspace Command will be happy to discuss our actions through proper diplomatic channels at a more appropriate time. Torres looked nervous. Captain, that's basically telling a Galactic Council Admiral to go stuff it. They could interpret that as an act of defiance. Then, they can interpret it however they like. I'm not abandoning a medical emergency for the sake of political convenience. Before anyone could respond, Dr. Patel's voice came through the intercom. Captain Chun to sickbay, please. We have a situation. Chun hurried to the medical bay, where she found Dr. Patel looking exhausted but cautiously optimistic. The alien woman on the bio bed was breathing steadily. Her color improved from the pale gray she had been when they first brought her aboard. How is she, doctor? Stable for now. The surgery was successful in relieving the cranial pressure, and the internal bleeding has stopped. She's still unconscious, but her brain activity is showing normal patterns for someone in a healing coma. Kira looked up hopefully. Does that mean my mother's going to get better? I think so, sweetheart. Dr. Patel smiled down at the child. Your mother is very strong, and she's fighting hard to get well again. But there's something else, Dr. Patel continued, addressing Chen privately. During the surgery, I discovered something interesting about their physiology. They're not just humanoid by coincidence. There are remarkable similarities to human biology, almost like we share a common evolutionary ancestor. Chen raised an eyebrow. How similar are we talking? Similar enough that our medical equipment worked on her without major modifications. Similar enough that our medications were effective in treating her injuries. In some ways, they're more like humans than some Earth species are to each other. Before Chun could process the implications of this revelation, the ship's red alert klaxons began blaring. Rodriguez's voice echoed through the corridors. Red alert. All hands to battle stations. Captain Chun to the bridge immediately. Chun raced back to the bridge, where the main view screen showed a sight that made her blood run cold. 7 ships of various configurations had formed a loose blockade around the Determination. She recognized the predatory lines of Zephyrian battle cruisers, the bulky forms of Corellian freighters converted to armed escorts, and the sleek profiles of hegemony patrol vessels. Report, Chin demanded as she settled into her command chair. The Zephyrian admiral has assembled a coalition fleet, Rodriguez explained grimly. They're demanding that we surrender the rescued aliens for proper processing according to Galactic Council First Contact protocols. And if we refuse, they've classified our rescue operation as an unauthorized first contact incident and are threatening to impound our vessel for violations of interstellar law. Chun stared at the screen, watching as the alien ships slowly tightened their formation around the Determination. Each vessel outgunned the human ship individually, and together they represented enough firepower to reduce her vessel to cosmic dust in minutes. Open a channel to Admiral Vex, she ordered. The view screen shimmered and resolved into the image of a tall, reptilian being with cold, calculating eyes and a ridge of spines along his elongated skull. Admiral Vex looked exactly like what Chun had expected from someone who would ignore a child's desperate pleas for help. Captain Chun, Vex spoke in a voice that managed to sound condescending even through the universal translator. You have interfered with a natural evolutionary process and violated 17 different interstellar protocols regarding contact with unrecognized species. We answered a distress call, Chun replied evenly. That's not a violation of anything except your own callousness. Vex's spines flattened against his skull in what Chun assumed was either anger or amusement. The species you have interfered with was clearly in a natural decline. Their distress call was monitored by multiple vessels, and the consensus was that intervention would be inappropriate. The consensus was wrong. That is not for a member of a junior species to determine. Vex's voice turned sharp. Humanity has been granted limited membership in the Galactic Council based on your technological achievements, but you lack the wisdom and experience necessary to make decisions about other species' fates. Chun felt her temper rising, but forced herself to remain calm. And what gives you the wisdom to decide who lives and who dies based on their species designation? 10,000 years of galactic civilization, Vex replied coldly. We have learned that emotional responses to individual suffering often lead to greater problems. Natural selection operates on a cosmic scale, and interference with that process has historically resulted in chaos and conflict. So you're saying we should have let a child watch her mother die because it was natural selection? I am saying that one individual's suffering does not outweigh the potential consequences of uncontrolled first contact with a species that may prove to be hostile, diseased, or otherwise harmful to galactic civilization. The conversation was interrupted by Lieutenant Torres, who was monitoring multiple communication channels simultaneously. Captain, I'm picking up additional transmissions. Word of our rescue is spreading beyond the local sector. We're receiving messages from over 30 different star systems. What kind of messages? Chin asked. Torres looked puzzled as he scanned the incoming data. That's just it, Captain. They're not all negative. In fact, most of them seem to be supportive. Rodriguez moved to look over Torres' shoulder at the communications display. That's impossible. No one supports unauthorized first contact operations. Maybe no government supports them, Torres corrected. But I'm getting personal messages from individuals across a dozen different species. They're calling our rescue an act of remarkable compassion and a demonstration of the highest moral principles. Shin blinked in surprise. She had expected universal condemnation from the galactic community, not support. Show me some of those messages. Torres put several of the transmissions on the main screen. The first was from a Valdorian scientist whose feathered crest was fluffed with apparent excitement. To the human vessel Determination, your actions today have restored my faith in the possibility of interspecies cooperation based on shared values rather than political convenience. The courage you showed in risking your lives for an unknown child demonstrates that morality transcends species boundaries. The next message was from a Corellian merchant captain whose normally gruff demeanor seemed softer than usual. Human ship, I monitored your rescue operation from beginning to end. I am ashamed to say that my own vessel received the original distress call and chose not to respond. Watching your people risk everything to save a dying mother and her child has reminded me why I originally chose a life among the stars. You have my deepest respect. Message after message poured in, each one expressing amazement and admiration for humanity's willingness to risk everything for strangers. Ship crews that had previously shown nothing but indifference were now openly praising the rescue operation. Admiral Vex's image flickered back onto the screen, his expression now visibly annoyed. Captain Chun, you will ignore these irrelevant transmissions and comply with our lawful orders. Transfer the rescued aliens to our custody immediately. I don't think so, Chun replied firmly. Those aliens are patients under the care of our medical team. I'm not turning injured people over to someone who is perfectly willing to let them die. You are in violation of interstellar law. Then, I guess you'll have to arrest me. The tension on the bridge was palpable as everyone waited to see if Vex would actually order an attack on the human vessel. Chin was gambling that the Admiral wouldn't want to fire on a ship conducting a medical emergency in full view of dozens of other vessels, especially with the growing public support for the rescue operation. Before Vex could respond, another voice cut into the communication channel. This one belonged to Dr. Patel, speaking from sickbay. Captain, you need to hear this. Our patient is awake. The transmission switched to show the interior of sickbay, where the alien woman was sitting up on the biobed with her daughter beside her. She was still clearly weak from her injuries, but her large eyes were alert and focused. I am Captain Nehru of the exploration vessel Wanderer. She spoke an accented but clear galactic standard. I wish to express my gratitude to the humans who saved my life, and that of my daughter. Admiral Vex's spines flattened completely. You will remain silent until properly debriefed by Galactic Council representatives. I will speak when and how I choose, Nehru replied with quiet dignity. My people, the Zilani, have been traveling the stars for over 3,000 years. We are not primitives in need of your protection, Admiral Vex. This revelation sent shock waves through the assembled fleet. The Zilani were known to the Galactic Council, though their contact had been limited and formal. They were recognized as an advanced, peaceful species with remarkable artistic and scientific achievements. The idea that the Council would have allowed a Zilani to die rather than risk an unauthorized rescue was scandal beyond belief. Furthermore, Nehru continued, I formally request asylum with the human fleet under the Galactic Council's own refugee protection statutes. My daughter and I choose to place ourselves under human protection rather than submit to interrogation by those who would have allowed us to die. The communications channels erupted with chatter as word of this development spread. A recognized member species of the Galactic Council was requesting asylum from humanity specifically because of their demonstrated compassion. The political implications were staggering. Admiral Vex was practically vibrating with rage. This is intolerable. You cannot harbor refugees from a legitimate council investigation. Actually, Commander Rodriguez said with a slight smile, according to Galactic Council Statute 847, any refugee who formally requests asylum must be granted temporary protection while their case is reviewed. That review process can take anywhere from 6 months to several years. Chun grinned. Rodriguez had apparently been doing his homework on interstellar law. You heard my first officer, Admiral. Captain Nehru has formally requested asylum, which we are bound by law to grant. Any attempt to interfere with that process would be a violation of Council statutes. The transmission from Vex cut out abruptly, but the other ships remained in formation around the determination. Chun could imagine the frantic communications flying between the various fleet commanders as they tried to figure out how to handle this unprecedented situation. Captain, Torres announced, I'm receiving a priority transmission from Starfleet Command. Admiral Park wants to speak with you immediately. Chun grimaced. She had been so focused on the immediate crisis that she had forgotten to report their situation to Earth. Admiral Park was probably receiving complaints from the Galactic Council and wondering why one of his ships was in the middle of an interstellar incident. Put him through, but keep it audio only, Admiral Park's voice came through the speakers with characteristic directness. Captain Shun, I've just spent the last hour fielding complaints from 3 different galactic ambassadors about unauthorized first contact operations. Would you care to explain why half the known galaxy is talking about the determination? We responded to a distress call, Admiral. A child was calling for help to save her dying mother. We couldn't just ignore that. There was a long pause before Park responded. Captain, you do realize that your rescue operation has become the most widely broadcast event in galactic history? Every major news network is carrying the story, and public opinion is overwhelmingly in your favor. Shun blinked in surprise. Sir, it seems that your act of simple human compassion has touched something in species across the galaxy. The Valdorian Science Council has issued a formal statement praising humanity's moral leadership. The Corellian Guild of Merchants is calling for a complete review of emergency response protocols. Even some hegemony military commanders are questioning the wisdom of ignoring distress calls. What about the Galactic Council? Are they going to press charges? Another pause. That's the interesting part, Captain. The Council is an emergency session, but not to condemn your actions. They're dealing with a massive public relations crisis. It turns out that allowing a known species to die while ignoring their child's pleas for help doesn't look very good when the whole galaxy is watching. Dr. Patel's voice interrupted the conversation. Captain, you should see this. Captain Nehru wants to make a public statement. The view screen switched back to sickbay, where Nehru was sitting up with her daughter in her lap. Despite her recent injuries, she looked remarkably composed and dignified. To all who can hear this transmission, she began, her voice carrying clearly across the communication channels, I am Captain Nehru of the Zalani people. Yesterday, my daughter and I were dying alone in space after our vessel suffered catastrophic damage. I was unconscious and near death. My young daughter was left to watch me die while calling desperately for help across the void. She paused, looking directly into the camera with those large, luminous eyes. 7 ships detected our distress call. 7 different species had the opportunity to save a child from watching her mother's death. 6 of those ships chose to ignore our pleas and continue with their business. Only one species, humanity, chose to risk their lives and their mission to save 2 strangers they had never met. Kira looked up at her mother with obvious adoration before addressing the camera herself. The humans came when no one else would. They flew through dangerous purple clouds and risked their big ship to save my mother. Captain Sarah and Dr. Patel are heroes, and I want everyone to know that humans are the kindest people in the whole galaxy. The simple, innocent testimony from the child hit the galactic community like a shock wave. Here was a member of a respected species publicly declaring that humanity had shown greater compassion and courage than any of the established galactic powers. Admiral Vex's image reappeared on the screen, his expression now showing barely controlled fury. This manipulation of public sentiment will not stand, he declared. The Galactic Council will not be swayed by emotional appeals and primitive theatrics. But, even as he spoke, more ships were arriving at their location. Not military vessels this time, but civilian craft from dozens of different species. Chen watched in amazement as merchant ships, private yachts, and even some scientific vessels formed a loose protective circle around the determination. Captain Shun, came a transmission from a Valdorian science vessel. This is Professor Kimmel. My crew and I have come to offer our support for your rescue operation. If Admiral Vex wants to arrest you for showing compassion, he'll have to go through us first. Similar messages came from other vessels as they arrived. It was becoming clear that the spontaneous gathering was not just about supporting the rescue, but about making a statement regarding the kind of galaxy they wanted to live in. Captain, Lieutenant Torres said in amazement, I'm counting over 40 civilian vessels now, with more arriving every hour. This is turning into some kind of interstellar demonstration. Chun stared at the view screen, watching as ship after ship took position around the determination. She had expected to face court-martial for violating first contact protocols. Instead, she was watching the birth of a movement that could reshape interstellar relations. The child who had sobbed for help in the emptiness of space had done more than save her mother's life. She had exposed the cold, calculating nature of galactic politics and inspired countless individuals to stand up for a simple principle, that compassion should transcend species boundaries. But the real test was still to come. The Galactic Council would have to respond to this unprecedented show of public support for human values. And their response would determine not just the fate of Captain Shun and her crew, but the future of humanity's place in the galactic community. As more and more ships continued to arrive, Shun realized that they were no longer just conducting a rescue mission. They had accidentally started a revolution. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in chaos. Representatives from 47 different species filled the great circular chamber on Nexus Prime, their voices rising in heated debate as they try to process the unprecedented situation unfolding in the Kepler Nebula. The usually orderly proceedings had devolved into something resembling a riot as delegates struggled to address what the media was already calling the Kira incident. Council Prime Minister Zrak, an ancient hegemony leader whose crystalline form had presided over galactic affairs for over 2 centuries, struck his resonance rod repeatedly in an attempt to restore order. The harmonic tones that usually commanded immediate silence were barely audible over the cacophony of angry voices. Order! Zrak's voice amplified through the chamber's acoustic systems. We will have order in this chamber. Slowly, the debates subsided as delegates took their positions at their respective podiums. The tension in the room was palpable, with traditional allies glaring at each other across political divides that had been irrelevant just hours before. Admiral Vex stood at the Zephyrian podium, his spines rigid with indignation as he prepared to address the assembly. Around him, holographic displays showed real-time footage from the Kepler Nebula, where the number of civilian vessels supporting the human ship had grown to over 200. Honored delegates, Vex began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. We face a crisis that threatens the very foundation of galactic order. A junior species has violated established protocols, interfered with natural selection processes, and manipulated public sentiment to avoid the consequences of their actions. Murmurs of agreement came from several traditional council supporters, but they were noticeably fewer than usual. Many delegates sat in uncomfortable silence, unwilling to publicly support what increasingly looked like institutional callousness. The human vessel determination conducted an unauthorized first contact operation, Vex continued, endangering their crew and violating the careful procedures we have established to protect galactic civilization from the chaos of uncontrolled species interactions. Delegate Ashira of the Valdorian Science Collective rose from her perch, her feathered crest fluffed in agitation. With respect, Admiral Vex, the species in question was already known to the Council. The Zilani have been recognized members for over 8 centuries. This was not a first contact situation, but a rescue operation. The circumstances are irrelevant, Vex snapped. The humans acted without authorization and ignored the consensus of senior species regarding the appropriate response. The consensus, Ashira replied coldly, was to let a child watch her mother die. Are you seriously defending that position before this assembly? The chamber erupted again as delegates chose sides in the growing confrontation. It was becoming clear that the Kira incident was exposing fundamental disagreements about the nature and purpose of galactic civilization that had been simmering beneath the surface for decades. Counselor Trem of the Corellian Merchant Guild stepped forward, his massive frame imposing even by the standards of his naturally large species. I have received over 3,000 communications from Corellian citizens in the past 6 hours, he announced. They are demanding to know why our vessels ignore the distress call, while a junior species risked everything to answer it. Public sentiment is not the basis for interstellar law, Vex protested. No, Trem agreed, but it is the basis for the legitimacy of this council. When the people we represent begin to question our moral authority, we have a serious problem. Prime Minister Zrak activated the central holographic display, showing the growing fleet of civilian vessels surrounding the determination. The sight was unprecedented in galactic history. Never before had so many different species united spontaneously around a single cause. The situation in the Kepler Nebula is escalating beyond our control, Zrak observed. We have reports of civilian uprisings on 17 different worlds, all demanding changes to our emergency response protocols. Several member species are threatening to withdraw from the Council if we prosecute the humans for their rescue operation. The hegemony delegate, General Carrix, leaned forward with his usual militaristic bearing. Then, we enforce order through strength. Disperse the civilian vessels and arrest the human crew for violations of interstellar law, and turn them into martyrs? Ashira challenged. General, have you seen the public response to this situation? The humans are being hailed as heroes across the galaxy. Any action we take against them will only fuel more unrest. Since when does this council bend to mob rule? Admiral Vex demanded. Since the mob started asking very reasonable questions about our priorities, Counselor Trem replied, such as why we spend billions of credits maintaining military fleets, but can't spare a single ship to answer a child's cry for help. The debate was interrupted by an urgent communication from the Chamber's information officer. Prime Minister, we're receiving a live transmission request from Captain Chun of the human vessel. She wishes to address the council directly. A ripple of surprise went through the assembly. It was virtually unprecedented for a ship captain to request direct communication with the full council, especially while under investigation for treaty violations. This is highly irregular, General Carrick's protested. So, is everything else about this situation? Prime Minister Zrak replied. Given the extraordinary circumstances, I believe we should hear what the humans have to say. The central display shimmered and resolved into the image of Captain Chun standing on her bridge. Behind her, the bridge crew worked quietly at their stations while the tactical display showed the massive civilian fleet that had gathered to support them. Honored delegates of the Galactic Council, Chun began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. I am Captain Sarah Chun of the United Earth Ship Determination. I appear before you not to defend my actions, but to ask a simple question. What kind of galaxy do we want to live in? The chamber fell silent as delegates listened to the human captain's words. 3 days ago, a child's voice echoed across the void, calling for help to save her dying mother. That voice was heard by multiple vessels from multiple species, all of whom chose to ignore it based on regulations, protocols, and calculated political considerations. Chun paused, looking directly at Admiral Vex through the transmission. My crew and I heard that same voice, and we made a different choice. We chose to respond not because it was politically advantageous, not because it followed proper protocols, but because it was the right thing to do. Your actions violated established procedures. Admiral Vex interrupted. Yes, they did, Chun acknowledged without hesitation. And I would violate them again without hesitation if faced with the same situation. Because sometimes, Admiral, doing what's right is more important than following procedures. Delegate Ashira leaned forward with interest. Captain Chun, can you help us understand the human perspective on the situation? What drove your decision to risk your ship and crew for strangers? Chun considered the question carefully before responding. On my world, we have a saying, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. We believe that moral responsibility transcends species boundaries, political alliances, and bureaucratic procedures. That's a very idealistic perspective, General Carrick observed. But idealism often leads to chaos and conflict, does it? Chun challenged. General, look at what's happening in the Kepler Nebula right now. Over 200 ships from dozens of different species have come together peacefully to support an act of compassion. I'm not seeing chaos. I'm seeing the galaxy coming together around shared values. Prime Minister Zrak studied the tactical displays showing the unprecedented gathering of civilian vessels. Captain, what do you believe this demonstration represents? I think it represents what the galaxy could become, Chun replied. Not a collection of species competing for advantage and calculating the political costs of basic decency, but a community united by the belief that every life has value regardless of what species it comes from. The transmission was interrupted by another urgent communication. This time it came from Captain Nehru, speaking from the Determination's sickbay, where she was continuing her recovery. Honored Council, Nehru said, I am Captain Nehru of the Zalani Exploration Service. As the individual whose life was saved by human intervention, I wish to make a formal statement. Captain Nehru, Admiral Vex said quickly, you are still recovering from serious injuries. Perhaps it would be better if you rested while the Council deliberates on these matters. With respect, Admiral, I am quite capable of speaking for myself, Nehru replied firmly. For over 3,000 years, the Zalani have been members of the galactic community. We have always believed in the principles of mutual aid and shared responsibility for the welfare of all sentient beings. She paused, looking directly at the camera. What I witnessed during my rescue has convinced me that humanity embodies those principles more completely than any species I have encountered. They risked everything to save strangers, not because they expected reward or recognition, but because they believe it was their moral duty to help. Little Kira appeared beside her mother, looking directly at the assembled council delegates with those large, innocent eyes. "The humans saved my mother when everyone else said no," she said in her clear, young voice. "They didn't care that we were different or that it was dangerous. They came because I asked for help. That's what good people do." The simple statement from the child hit the council chamber like a physical blow. Here was the voice that had started the entire crisis, speaking with the absolute moral clarity that only children possess. Counselor Trem stood up slowly, his massive frame commanding attention. "I move that this council formally commend the crew of the UES Determination for their extraordinary courage and compassion in conducting a successful rescue operation under hazardous conditions." Seconded, Delegate Ashira called out immediately. Admiral Vex's spines flattened in shock. "This is outrageous. You cannot commend a clear violation of established protocols." "Watch us," Trem replied grimly. "All in favor of commending the human crew?" Hands, claws, appendages, and energy signatures rose throughout the chamber as delegates voted. The count was overwhelming: 38 in favor, 7 opposed, with 2 abstentions. Prime Minister Zrak struck his resonance rod. The motion passes by a substantial majority. The Galactic Council formally commends the crew of the UES Determination for their heroic rescue operation. But the session was far from over. Ashira rose again, her expression determined. "I have a second motion," she announced. "I move that this council establish new emergency response protocols that prioritize humanitarian aid over political considerations, and that these protocols be known as the Kira Protocols in honor of the child whose courage exposed the flaws in our current system." The debate that followed was intense, but relatively brief. The overwhelming public support for the human rescue operation had shifted the political calculus dramatically. Delegates who might normally have opposed such changes found themselves unable to argue against policies that would prevent future tragedies. When a vote was called, the Kira Protocols passed by an even larger margin than the commendation: 41 in favor, for opposed, 2 abstentions. Admiral Vex stood in stunned silence as the council systematically dismantled everything he had worked to maintain. The old order of calculated indifference was giving way to something unprecedented: a galactic government that prioritized moral action over political convenience. "This is a mistake," he said finally. "Emotion-based decision-making will lead to chaos and conflict." "Admiral," Prime Minister Zrak replied, "the chaos we're seeing now isn't caused by emotion. It's caused by the moral bankruptcy of a system that would let children watch their parents die for the sake of bureaucratic convenience." The session was interrupted once more by urgent news from the Kepler Nebula. The number of civilian vessels had grown to over 500, and they were beginning to organize themselves into what appeared to be a permanent humanitarian fleet. "They're calling themselves the Compassion Fleet," the information officer reported. "Ships from 43 different species, all volunteering to respond to emergency calls that might be ignored by official channels." Captain Chen's voice came through the communication system one final time. "Honored delegates, the galaxy is changing whether we guide that change or not. The question is whether we'll be part of building something better, or whether we'll cling to systems that have already failed." Prime Minister Zrak looked around the chamber at the delegates who had just voted to revolutionize galactic emergency response protocols. "Captain Chun, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I want to thank you and your crew for reminding us what we're supposed to be fighting for. The Council formally requests that Earth consider accepting a position on our Emergency Response Coordination Committee." Chun smiled. "We'd be honored to serve, Prime Minister. But I should warn you that humans have a tendency to put moral principles ahead of political expedience." "Captain," Zrak replied, "after today, I think that's exactly what this galaxy needs." As the council session drew to a close, delegates began filing out to face the massive public relations challenge of explaining to their constituents how the galaxy's emergency response protocols had been completely revolutionized by a child's cry for help. Admiral Vex remained at his podium, staring at the displays showing the growing Compassion Fleet. The old order was crumbling around him, replaced by something he didn't understand and couldn't control. "This won't last," he muttered to himself. "Idealism always fails when faced with reality." But As he watched hundreds of ships from dozens of species working together in perfect harmony around a single shared principle, he began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, he was wrong. The child who had sobbed for help in the darkness of space had done more than save her mother. She had changed the moral trajectory of an entire galaxy, proving that sometimes the smallest voices can spark the greatest revolutions. The real question now was whether this new spirit of cooperation and compassion could survive the challenges that lay ahead. The galaxy was about to find out if humanity's idealistic vision of interstellar community was sustainable or if it would crumble under the weight of political reality. But, for the moment, as civilian ships from across known space worked together to establish the Compassion Fleet, it seemed that the universe had decided to give idealism a chance. 1 year later, the Memorial Garden on Unity Station bloomed with flowers from 47 different worlds. The station itself had been built in the exact location where the UES Determination had first encountered little Kira's distress call, constructed as a symbol of the galaxy's commitment to the principles that had emerged from that fateful rescue. Captain Sarah Chun walked through the garden's winding paths, pausing at the central monument where a holographic display showed the faces of every being who had been saved by the Compassion Fleet in the past 12 months. The number was staggering. Over 3,000 lives preserved by the new emergency response protocols that had grown out of one child's desperate plea for help. Captain Chun, the familiar voice, made her smile as she turned to see Kira running toward her through the garden. The young Zalani had grown in the past year, but her enthusiastic embrace was just as warm as it had been that first day in sick bay. "Hello, sweetheart," Chun said, kneeling down to accept the hug. "How are you settling in on the station?" "It's wonderful." Kira's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Mother, and I have our own quarters near the medical center, and I get to attend classes with children from 12 different species. Did you know that Corellia Mathematics uses base 16 instead of base 10? It's so much more efficient for calculating hyperspace trajectories." Captain Nehru approached more sedately, her recovery complete, but for a small scar along her temple that served as a permanent reminder of that terrible day in the nebula. She had accepted a position as the Compassion Fleet's chief medical coordinator, using her expertise to develop treatment protocols for the dozens of species that might require emergency care. "Captain Chun," Nehru said formally, then dropped the protocol to embrace a rescuer. "Sarah, thank you for coming to the anniversary celebration. Kira has been talking about nothing else for weeks." "I wouldn't miss it," Chun replied. "How are the new medical protocols working out?" "Better than we ever imagined." Nehru's expression grew thoughtful. "We've treated injuries and illnesses from species that were completely unknown to galactic medicine a year ago. Each rescue teaches us something new about the diversity of life in the universe." They were joined by Dr. Patel, who now served as the head of xenobiology research at Unity Station's medical complex. Her work on developing universal treatment protocols had earned her recognition throughout the galactic medical community. "The most amazing thing," Dr. Patel explained as they walked toward the station's central plaza, "is how many physiological similarities we've discovered between species that supposedly evolved independently. It's almost like there's some underlying template for intelligent life that we're only beginning to understand." The plaza was filled with beings from dozens of different species, all gathered to commemorate the first anniversary of the Kira incident. What struck Chun most was how naturally they all seemed to interact, as if the old barriers of species prejudice and political calculation had simply melted away. "Captain Chun," another familiar voice called out, and Chun turned to see Commander Rodriguez approaching with Admiral Park and several other Starfleet officers. "Commander," Chun smiled. "How's command of the Determination treating you?" Rodriguez had been promoted to captain after Chun accepted her new position as Director of Emergency Response Coordination for the Galactic Council. The promotion had been well-deserved, though Chun sometimes missed the simplicity of commanding a single ship. "She's a good ship with a good crew," Rodriguez replied. "Though I have to admit, none of our rescue missions have been quite as dramatic as our first one." Admiral Park stepped forward, his weathered face showing the satisfaction of someone who had watched his protege exceed all expectations. "Captain Chun, the latest reports from the Compassion Fleet are remarkable. Response times to emergency calls have improved by over 300%, and we haven't lost a single ship or crew in the past 6 months." "The coordination protocols are working," Chun agreed. "When you have 500 volunteer vessels from 43 different species all working together, You can respond to multiple emergencies simultaneously across vast areas of space. Speaking of which, Dr. Patel interjected, we should head to the main ceremony. I believe some special guests are arriving. They moved toward the station's main auditorium, where a crowd was already gathering for the anniversary celebration. The guest list included representatives from every species in the Galactic Council, plus several that had only recently been discovered thanks to the Compassion Fleet's expanded patrol routes. As they entered the auditorium, Chen was struck by the sight of Admiral Vex sitting in the front row beside Prime Minister Zrak. The Zephyrian's presence was perhaps the most remarkable change of all. After initially resisting the new emergency protocols, he had gradually become one of their strongest supporters. The transformation had begun when a Zephyrian colony ship suffered catastrophic system failure 6 months earlier. The Compassion Fleet had responded immediately, saving over 2,000 lives, including Vex's own grandchildren. The experience had given the Admiral a very personal understanding of why emergency response couldn't be subject to political calculation. Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all configurations, Prime Minister Zrak's harmonic voice filled the auditorium as the ceremony began. We gather today to commemorate not just a rescue operation, but the moment when our galaxy chose compassion over convenience. The presentation began with a holographic recreation of the original distress call, Kira's young voice echoing through the auditorium with the same desperate plea that had started all. Even though everyone present had heard the recording before, the emotional impact was still profound. My mother is dying. Please, someone help us. At the time this call was transmitted, Zrak continued, 7 ships detected it. 6 chose to ignore it based on established protocols that prioritized efficiency over empathy. Only 1 species chose to answer. The recreation showed the UES determination changing course toward the nebula. Captain Chen's voice responding to the desperate child with simple human decency. Help is coming. What followed changed not just the fate of 2 individuals, but the moral foundation of our entire galactic community. The ceremony continued with testimonials from beings who had been rescued by the Compassion Fleet over the past year. A Corellian merchant family whose ship had been attacked by pirates. A scientific expedition trapped on a collapsing moon. A group of refugees fleeing a civil war that had erupted in a previously peaceful star system. Each story reinforced the same theme. Lives that would have been lost under the old system had been saved by the new protocols that prioritized rapid response over bureaucratic approval. But perhaps most importantly, Zrak said as the testimonials concluded, the Kira protocols have given us something we didn't know we were missing: hope. The Prime Minister gestured to the mixed audience, where beings who had traditionally viewed each other with suspicion or indifference now sat together as colleagues and friends. For the first time in galactic history, we have proof that different species can work together not for profit or political advantage, but simply because it's the right thing to do. The ceremony's climax came when Kira herself took the stage. Now 8 years old, and speaking perfect galactic standard, she had lost none of her natural charisma or emotional honesty. A year ago, I thought my mother was going to die, and I would be all alone in space forever, she began, her voice carrying easily through the auditorium's acoustic system. I was scared and didn't know what to do, so I just asked for help. She paused, looking out at the assembled representatives of 47 different civilizations. I learned something that day that I think maybe grown-ups sometimes forget. It doesn't matter what someone looks like or where they come from or what language they speak. When someone needs help, you help them. That's what good people do. The simplicity of her message was devastating in its clarity. Complex political theories and sophisticated diplomatic protocols all crumbled in the face of a child's basic moral understanding. The humans came to help us because they're good people, Kira continued. But after meeting everyone here, I've learned that most people in the galaxy are good people. They just needed someone to show them that it was okay to act like it. The standing ovation that followed was unlike anything in the history of the Galactic Council. Beings who had spent centuries calculating political advantages and minimizing risks were applauding a child who had reminded them of their fundamental moral responsibilities. As the formal ceremony concluded, smaller gatherings formed throughout the station. Chun found herself in conversation with various fleet commanders who had joined the Compassion Fleet, each sharing stories of successful rescues and growing cooperation between species that had previously had minimal contact. The most surprising thing, observed Captain Threlm of the Valdorian vessel Scientific Endeavor, is how much we've learned about the galaxy simply by responding to emergency calls. We've discovered 17 new species, mapped 34 previously unknown star systems, and made contact with civilizations that have been isolated for centuries. It makes sense when you think about it, Dr. Patel added. Emergency calls often come from the edges of known space, where explorers and pioneers are pushing into uncharted territories. By responding to those calls, we're naturally expanding our knowledge of the universe. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the station's command center. Commander Torres, who now served as Unity Station's operations chief, appeared on the nearby comm screen, looking tense. Captain Chun, we've just received a massive distress call from the Outer Rim. A refugee convoy of over 50 ships is under attack by an organized pirate fleet. They're requesting immediate assistance. Chun felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with emergency response situations. How far out are they? 6 hours at maximum warp for the nearest Compassion fleet vessels. But the pirate fleet is large and well-armed. This isn't going to be a simple rescue operation. Around the room, commanders from various species were already moving toward their communication devices, coordinating with their ships and crews. The festive atmosphere of the anniversary celebration was instantly replaced by the focused urgency of professional rescuers responding to a crisis. This is exactly what we trained for, Captain Rodriguez said as he prepared to return to the Determination. Multiple ships, multiple species, all working together toward a common goal. Be careful out there, Chen advised. Pirate fleets don't usually attack refugee convoys unless they're very confident in their abilities. As the various rescue ships prepared to depart, Chun watched from the station's observation deck. Within 30 minutes, over 40 vessels from 15 different species were moving in coordinated formation toward the Outer Rim. A year ago, such cooperation would have been impossible. Different command structures, incompatible communication systems, and political rivalries would have made coordinated action nearly impossible. Now it looked effortless. The protocols developed over the past year had created a unified command structure that could integrate any willing vessel into a coordinated response. Species differences were no longer obstacles to overcome, but advantages to exploit as each race contributed their unique capabilities to the common effort. 6 hours later, Chen received the mission reports in Unity Station's command center. The rescue had been successful, but barely. The pirate fleet had indeed been formidable, requiring the combined firepower of the entire Compassion Fleet Response Force to defeat. More importantly, the rescued refugees turned out to be from 2 previously unknown species that had been fleeing a planetary catastrophe in an unexplored sector. Without the Compassion Fleet's response, not only would they have been killed by pirates, but their species might never have been discovered by galactic civilization. 57 ships rescued, Torres reported. Over 12,000 beings evacuated to safety. 2 new species welcomed into the galactic community. And the pirate fleet that's been raiding the Outer Rim for 3 years has been completely destroyed. Shen nodded with satisfaction. It was exactly the kind of outcome that justified everything they had built over the past year. Any casualties on our side? Minor damage to 3 vessels. 17 injuries, no fatalities. The new combined tactics protocols worked exactly as designed. As Chun reviewed the mission reports, she was struck by one particular detail. The Zephyrian battle cruiser Righteous Prophet, Admiral Vex's former flagship, now commanded by his daughter, had been credited with destroying the pirates' command vessel and saving a refugee ship that had been captured. A year ago, that same ship had been part of the fleet trying to arrest the Determination for conducting an unauthorized rescue. Now, it was leading rescue operations and making contact with new species on behalf of the galactic community. The transformation was complete. What had begun as one ship answering one child's call for help had become a fundamental shift in how galactic civilization approached its most basic moral obligations. Later that evening, as the anniversary celebration wound down, Chen found herself back in the memorial garden with Kira and Captain Nehru. The young Zalani was exhausted from the day's excitement, but still reluctant to return to her quarters. Captain Sarah, Kira said as they sat beside the fountain at the garden center, "Do you think we really changed the galaxy?" Chen considered the question seriously. "What do you think, sweetheart?" "I think maybe we just reminded everyone who they wanted to be," Kira replied with the wisdom that sometimes comes naturally to children. "All those people who helped today, they wanted to help a year ago too. They just thought they weren't supposed to. And now, Now they know it's okay to be good people. Chun smiled, struck once again by the child's ability to reduce complex philosophical questions to their essential truths. The galaxy hadn't really changed its fundamental nature. It had simply been given permission to act on its better instincts. Captain Nehru, Chun said as they prepared to leave the garden. What's next for you, and Kira? We've been invited to join a deep space exploration mission, Nehru replied. A joint venture between 12 different species to map the far edge of the galaxy. Kira wants to see if there are other children out there who might need help. Chun felt a familiar tightness in her chest. Even after everything they had accomplished, there were still uncounted billions of beings scattered across the vast emptiness of space, some of whom might be facing crises that could destroy their worlds or their civilizations. But now, thanks to a child who had refused to accept that the universe was too cold and uncaring to answer a desperate plea for help, there's a fleet of volunteers ready to respond to any call for assistance, no matter how distant or dangerous. Just promise me you'll be careful out there, Chun said, embracing both mother and daughter. The galaxy is a safer place than it was a year ago, but it's still full of dangers. We promise, Kira said solemnly. But, Captain Sarah, if we do find someone who needs help, we know we can call the Compassion Fleet, and you'll come to save them, just like you came to save us. As Chun watched the Zalani mother and daughter walk back toward their quarters, she reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them all to this moment. A child's desperate call across the void had exposed the moral bankruptcy of a system that valued protocol over compassion. The response to that call had sparked a revolution that transformed galactic civilization. The universe was still vast and dangerous and often cruel, but now it also